Danny Dorling.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invite. I like your format because I can only speak for 15 minutes and then you get to question me. Have we got any geographers? Great. Okay, I was going to start off with some geography for you. I'm the Halford Mackinder Professor of Geography. Halford is sometimes called the father of British geography. He established a department in Oxford and helped, I think, create the LSE and the University of Reading. He was also a Conservative and Unionist MP. And he also did various things in Africa, which means that the name of my chair will probably be changed in the next 2 or 3 years. He wasn't a particularly nice man. But this isn't atypical of geography. Geographers don't tend to look into their history. I'll just give you my little department. It's got much better, by the way. I'm not going to damn it. But geography in Britain began in the late 1890s as an academic subject with the sponsorship of the Royal Geographical Society to create geography departments for one main single purpose. And that single purpose was to train young men, only men, to become colonial officers. So that is the reason for the establishment of geography departments. We had widening participation from the start. The advertisement in the Times in 1899 said that one of the students wouldn't have to pay fees. So that's not new, the idea that you try and get some diversity. The interesting thing, if you want to know about the history of geography, if the rest of you, I'll do this very quickly, is that this was a new subject. So it wasn't an upper class subject. It wasn't the greats and it wasn't classics. And it was a subject leading directly to a career, like law or medicine. So it actually attracted from the lower middle classes. Because if you go out to the empire and serve your time as a colonial officer for 30 years, you can come back and have the cottage with the roses round the window and all that kind of thing. So geography starts fairly low down, but then slowly changes its position in Britain. I'll leave you to ask me questions about why that was. Very thankfully for us, the empire went and we were in trouble, but then we noticed that the glaciers were coming upwards rather than coming down the mountains. It took us about 10 years and we had climate change and now we're doing fine. But over the politics of geography, you'll tend to think if you get geography lectures, oh, it's very radical, they're all Greens, they're all revolutionary, they all read Marx. Doesn't tend to actually be like that. My department had a lecturer called John Patton, who became an MP and then Secretary of State under the Conservatives. We produced 2 Lord Mayors out of our lecturers, both Conservative, and one of our undergraduates went on to become Prime Minister Theresa May. And we only have 80 undergraduates at most. Right? Not a single Labour politician came out of my geography department in Oxford. There was a right-wing tendency in the discipline that was formed to run an empire. It's hardly surprising, but it is changing. And I'm using up my time. Why am I here? I'm here because I was born into a Labour family. And that might be the case for some of you. Let me tell you, mine's very Labour. My granddad was Labour. If he had managed to get back from Berlin in time in 1945, he was promised a seat that normally Labour would never win. And they didn't think it was going to be won, but there was a landslide. And his life would have been different. My mum used to run Labour Party committee rooms in a suburb of Oxford. So my early memories are of multiple sheets of yellow and pink paper. This is before we had other, and sitting room being full of armies of people because you knocked up. That's how you got the vote out. Oxford was always a swing seat. There was a famous by-election in the 30s where the slogan was that a vote for Hogg is a vote for Hitler. Quentin Hogg was a Tory candidate and he won. Turns out to have actually been not a bad person. He supported the Beveridge report in 1942 and said it made sense because it could only be funded by wealth redistribution, and that would work. Right? It's quite incredible. You look back at the past and how our politicians have changed. The country was incredibly left-wing in the 1940s, even more so in the 50s. The Tory Party built more council houses than Labour in the 1950s. In the 1960s, it was pretty radical for the political parties. You always think there's huge differences between you if you're in politics, but almost always the political parties are actually very, very close to each other. This is why members of Parliament can cross the floor and join the other side, because it's never that different. My argument would be that what's happened since the 1970s is that our politics has moved to the right. It's moved so far to the right that a couple of years ago, the Financial Times produced an analysis of the political position of every single political party in the world, other than those in really poor countries. All middle-income countries, all rich countries. And there's a lovely graph. If I had one slide, I'd put it up and show you. And it includes every party that there is that you've ever heard of. Now, of course, some party has to be on the extreme right of every other political party in the world in a democracy. But that party on the extreme right was the Conservatives under Liz Truss. There was nothing more extreme in terms of economic policy. According to the Financial Times, which based its graph on an analysis by many thousand political scientists around the world, who don't give a toss about the UK, that's where we are. We are extreme. I'll try in my remaining 5 minutes to persuade you how this happened. Margaret Thatcher dragged the country to the right, and the men who supported her, put her there, whispered in her ears, wrote the books that were in her handbag. It wasn't just Margaret Thatcher. Oh, my granddad knew her dad, by the way. Alderman Roberts. Never believed she's a grocer's daughter. Alderman Roberts owned 2 shops. That's very different from 1. That puts you in the 1%. Margaret Thatcher was in the 1% before she came up to Oxford and then married into the 0.1%. So we're very deceptive of how we think we are. For a Tory, of course, that's poor. Right? She's only... Well, Sunak. Sunak's father was a GP, his mother ran the pharmacy. There are only 200 GPs where they have a pharmacy as well. They define the very bottom of the 1%. I work on inequality. That income level, GP running a pharmacy, gives you an income that puts you at the bottom of the top 1%. Slightly dodgy because, there's an incentive to send your patients round to buy the drugs. Young Sunak did the accounts. They struggled, but they made just enough money to be able to send him to Winchester. I always feel sorry for Sunak because he's the only MP who actually really did support the football team he says he supports. Right? He supported Southampton all the way through Winchester, I'm reliably told. Sunak's useful for this, by the way, because he very generously married somebody from the very top of the 1% in the world. So they kind of bracket it if you want to know, what is the 1%? It's Mr. and Mrs. Sunak and everything in between them. I've lost my thread. The politics moves rightwards. The Conservatives win. They win the hearts and the minds and the soul. What's unusual about the UK isn't the strength of our Conservative Party, although it's the most successful political party in history. It's the feebleness of the left that's unusual across Europe. And I think there are reasons for this. We were not invaded. Our elite didn't capitulate. We didn't have an overthrow of who's in charge. We had an empire. We still have families owning parts of the land around here who were given it 1,000 years ago, right? That's an unusual situation. But I think the left has done very badly for a century, rather than the right doing very well. What happens? John Smith dies suddenly of a heart attack. A young MP who had been shoehorned into Sedgefield becomes leader. He changes Clause 4, he changes the party, his friends around him change the party, not worried about the rich earn, what they earn, how much they earn, as long as they pay their taxes. and is politically successful and lucky. Very low numbers of votes in 2005, but manages to hold on. Does some good, I say some. Huge amounts of changing of double glazing in council houses done quietly because Labour wasn't proud of that. More spending for the NHS, which did have an effect, but lifted 1 million children out of poverty in such a way that almost none of them noticed. So our inequality measure didn't move, because if you just take the children just below the poverty line and help their families to get just above it, it doesn't actually alter anybody's lives. That's the most damning thing I have to say about New Labour. But it also pushed the Tory Party to the right. You know, they can't flip over and become left. So by 2014, David Cameron took the Conservative Party out of the European bloc, the EPP, and joined an alliance in Europe with Alternative for Deutschland. Our Conservative Party became a European far-right party in terms of its policies and its behaviour and its beliefs. Our Labour Party had become a kind of mild Christian Conservative Party, or if you like, the very right-wing extreme end of Social Democratic. That's the situation we got at that point. Hence we begin to get Brexit, hence we get Truss and the complete madness from Tufton Street. And we're only saved by international bankers. It's an incredible situation. Those 49 days came to an end because international bankers said this just isn't feasible from outside of this country. Step in Corbyn, as you introduced me. I knew Corbyn from years ago because he was one of the people that if you ever wanted a room in the House of Commons, you just asked him and he'd book you one. Right? That's what he did. He was quiet, thinking, shy, not wanting to have the limelight person, the beardy one. He won his seat in 1983 against a fellow at my university who later went on to be the chief advisor for Migration Watch, watching those dodgy migrants trying to come in. He stood for the Conservatives. How did Corbyn become the candidate in 1983? The breakup from the Labour Party was formed at that time, called the Social Democratic Party. And I think both Labour candidates ran off to them and they had nobody left and Jeremy was there. That's how he came to be the candidate and win in 1983. And then he won and he won and he won and he won again. And his vote and his popularity rose up and up and up again locally because he likes talking to people. He's not posh. He went to a crap minor private school in the middle of nowhere and didn't go to university. Right? He's not posh. He's weird. His mum and dad met at Colmay Hall in 1936 in a rally to try and stop fascism. Right? So if that's your beginnings, if that's how mum and dad met, you can see what they talked about. You might think, what on earth are they doing sending him to a minor private school? But that's just how things were back then. Didn't go to university, went to Jamaica, voluntary service overseas, and for the geographers, in case you thought I was neglecting you, he taught geography. So we have the leader of the opposition being a geographer and the Prime Minister being a geographer at one point. He didn't want to be leader. He had to step forward from the socialist group because John MacDonald had had a heart attack. Diane Abbott knew she had no chance because she knew what this country is like. In case you don't know, it's rather obvious. There was nobody left to stand. He stood. He only stood because my MP, Andrew Smith, voted for him at the last minute, 1 second to midnight. Andrew Smith only voted for him because Val, his wife, basically wasn't going to go anywhere near Andrew if he didn't. Val was lovely. That's how we get Jeremy. And then the Labour Party members vote. Party members are a problem. Parties in Europe can be split into two kinds. Those which are actually a party and those which are a front for somebody, where you have a few members but you don't let them have any. Viktor Orban has this in Hungary. Lots of party members are trouble unless they behave really well because they might decide they want to have an influence. Right? So you've got to find ways of managing them. You know, you can have consultation groups and all kinds of things. Just don't let them have an actual power. The party members were presented with 5 people and over 50% of them voted for the weird beardy bloke. That's how he becomes leader. What does the weird beardy bloke do? He spends 6 months sitting in Portcullis House and the leader of the opposition's offices going, what has just happened? Right, in utter shock. That's what's happened. There's an assumption that he'll just do really, really badly in the election. So he's not attacked very much. There is a coup, there's an attempt to get rid of him. It's not very pleasant, but it's not absolutely vicious. That election is called by Theresa May for 2017. My little part in it is being called and said, will I be in the party political broadcast? And so I go down to London and a bloke called Ken Loach films me for 40 seconds saying, this manifesto makes sense. Didn't show the bit that said, all they're offering is to turn us into Germany in 5 years, right? Which was what the spending promises were. Then the problem happens. The problem is what happened in the voting. The biggest, fastest shift in voting this country has ever known occurred between 2015 and 2017. Biggest shift to the left we've ever seen, ever been able to measure. There was a bigger shift between 35 and 45, but that occurred over 10 years. This change over 2 years was faster. It was a shock. It was so big that Theresa couldn't form a government. But it also scared the hell out of the Labour machinery, because rather than having this lame duck who was going to disappear, you suddenly got a popular person suggesting completely mad things, like not pressing the button for Armageddon. You can't have that in Britain. So he had to be got rid of. And the question was how. Various attempts were made in various ways. There was a potential that even he thought it was extremely unlikely. But the reality of him becoming Prime Minister, or regime of him becoming Prime Minister, wasn't acceptable. It particularly, and this upsets them when I say it, and some of them are my friends, it wasn't acceptable to The Guardian. That means that people, the book Peak and Justice is dedicated to Dawn Foster, who's a Guardian journalist, who The Guardian stopped allowing her to write in The Guardian. Why was Labour unacceptable to The Guardian? Because it would change the lives of leading journalists in The Guardian in a way that was so daring and dangerous that it was better to write that he was awful and to help Boris get in than the risk. The risk was that in 5 years we would raise taxes and we would change other things so that we had an economy and a society which looked like Germany. That immediately reduces the number of people who can go to private schools and exclude themselves from society. If you are well paid in The Guardian, you live in North London, you send your child, if they don't get into Camden School for Girls, to North London Collegiate or a series of other schools. Your children wouldn't be able to go to those schools. You wouldn't be able to have your holidays. You wouldn't be able to afford a second house. And it could all go wrong. So why lose your entire lifestyle just for this pipe dream? Better to let Brexit happen than to let that happen. That is still my reading of events. It may not be, but people really thought about it like that. I don't believe that anybody who knows London politics believes that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semite, not least because he's surrounded by Jewish people. Right? That's who the party are around Jeremy. But it stuck. It stuck. It was just enough to keep bashing on. But he was a clear and present danger. He was also a clear and present danger in terms of security, in terms of special relationship. Just had to go. I'm going to stop there because I've definitely gone over my 15 minutes. The book includes, which is called Peak and Justice, includes a chapter on Jeremy, which sums up most of this. The more interesting chapter is on Starmer, which is titled, Why Did You Not See Me? Which were the words spoken by the Deliveroo driver that he hit, who had to go to hospital. And the interesting thing about that is, if Jeremy Corbyn had driven the car and hit a Deliveroo driver who had to go to hospital, it would be a new story. But Starmer was anointed. He was going to number 10. You don't do bad press stories on somebody who's going to be the Prime Minister, particularly if you want the country to be sorted out. And we were in chaos. 3 Prime Ministers in 3 years, no general election. I'm hopeful now. I've been really pleasantly surprised. by the leadership. I was amazed by Starmer's choice of Attorney General. I was amazed by the immediate banning of 10% of arms exports to Israel. There are legal reasons why this has occurred, but I'm glad he's doing it. I was surprised by Reeve's budget. I suspect this is my last cynical one, and I promise I'll be nice and how you can attack me or whatever. I predict that every budget we get, Rachel Reeves will say, I didn't want to do this. Don't worry next year. And she'll mean it, which is even better. But each budget we're going to get from now on and the last one will be unusual, redistributive, helpful, and so on. Because we're completely stuck. We're almost bankrupt as a country. The poorest 20% of people in Britain are poorer than the poorest 20% in Eastern Europe. We still have to borrow at incredible rates from abroad, and we can't even make our own steel. We're the only G7 country who can't. We rely on 3 growth industries: gambling, where thanks to Gordon Brown, although I'm cynical, we have the largest gambling industry in the world, larger than America, because he introduced zero tax on it. Casino banking, which has been helped by Brexit, but is not necessarily a safe thing to bet on, and higher education export earnings, which are truly enormous, but again, slightly dodgy in that it would really, really help if our universities concentrated very much on making sure that what people get when they come and do a degree here from overseas is very good. Because if they stop coming, there are entire cities, Newcastle, Leeds, Sheffield, Manchester, let alone Exeter, Durham and Oxford, whose future, we're one industry towns now. But I'm pleasantly surprised by what they've currently done. Slight watering down of non-dom regulations, give or take. I really am hoping that the 3rd child will be allowed to eat, which is, if you know where that policy is, it's the statistic comes from a man called Torsten Bell, who showed that 56% of children with a brother and sister go hungry several times a month. And the simplest way to stop that in England is to allow them to have the benefits that they used to have. I think things are getting better, but I do think we can't behave like Russia used to behave, like Stalin did, and try and take the picture of the man with the beard off the painting as if he never existed. We did at one point have the largest social movement in Europe and 500,000 members. It was quite incredible. And when Labour headquarters phoned me up, because I was doing a talk with John MacDonald in Surrey, and said, you do know they're a bunch of Trotskyists, I had to explain that these maths teachers and other people in Surrey were just maths teachers in Surrey, and they had no idea who Trotsky was. There was an unbelievable paranoia in the heart of the Labour machine at this time, which very sadly has meant that that energy, which was quite incredible, has gone. It could come back. If it doesn't, and this is the one to leave you with, the danger is that Kemi and Nigel make a deal. Kemi's lot stand in the city, Nigel's lot stand in the countryside. Elon puts his money in, and bang, because we're the target. Not Canada, not Greenland, not Mexico. The target from those jubilant men in the USA is us. We are the next prize. And that should galvanise Labour more than anything else. Thank you for letting me rant.
If I may steal the first question.
There's some seats around there if anybody wants to.
Yeah. There's also seats on the bench as well, if you wish. Yes, so if I can steal the first question. You're obviously very closely aligned with Jeremy. Now, when Jeremy ceases to be leader in 2020, why do you decide to stick with the party, not defect to the Greens or become an independent?
Almost all my friends did. And all my black friends in the Labour Party did, apart from one. But they didn't. They were all expelled. It was quite incredible. I went to Labour fundraisers in London and in Oxford, but everybody was white. And, you know, if anything was going to make me leave, it would have been that incredible. The purges and the expulsions. And in fact, nobody were. They were expelling all the black people. The one who wasn't was Doreen Lawrence. She wasn't expelled. Stephen's mother. Bloody mindedness. I'm quite good at controlling my tweets. Right, there is nothing there. You can go back to the very beginning. I'm an academic, so I'm careful. I say things that I think are factually true. But also, it's a long, long, long struggle. You know, it's a long struggle. We're forced by first past the post to have these two ridiculous parties, which are the broadest of tents, where the hatred within is much greater than the hatred across. That's one of the sad things. The bitterness within both the Conservative Party, between Conservatives against each other, and the bitterness within Labour. There's more hate within these two parties than between them. And PR would sort this for me. My favourite political party in Europe is the Left Party of Finland. It used to be the Women's Party. If you want a solution, there's always loads of parties on the left, all run by old men. And it gets down, and we've got one in Britain that only has 2 members. Right? Loads of them, completely pointless. What really works is when your Women's Party merges with the left parties. And what you got in Finland, it's all run by women now. The colour is pink, it has pink balloons. And the Left Party in the last government in Finland, they had the education and health ministries. Finland has abolished homelessness, the only part of Europe which has, due to somebody in the Left Party. Incredibly successful party. That's my party. Other people might not like it. But at the moment, Labour, you've got, if you like, left, traditional social democrat, and One Nation Tories. And you're putting them all together in a room and trying to get them. And until we get rid of first past the post, we have to just persevere with it. Yeah.
Thank you. I can take the next question then, please.
Go on, be brave.
So a big criticism of the current Labour Party is the reluctance to rejoin the EU. And I know obviously Corbyn had very anti-EU stances. Do you think that a way of Britain rebuilding itself would be through, once again, formulating relations with the EU and the single market?
Yeah. I don't think Corbyn was anti-EU. I think he was agnostic. If he'd been, and this is because he's bloody minded and not good at politics, and he's not Machiavellian. If he'd been against the EU, he would have said so. He always says what he believes, and he didn't. He did believe in party democracy, and the party was split, and he wasn't sure. And of course, he did come from that era in the past with the 1974 referendum, where he liked Tony Benn, and Tony Benn was against it as a rich men's club, and Tories on the right were against it. But I don't think he was against. If you like, the worst thing that happened to the EU was us joining, because we controlled bits or controlled directorates. Most of the legislation that people object to was Britain inspired. But anyway, Starmer and Rees really want to rejoin. So there was an announcement today, this morning, that we may be allowed into the pan-European something North African trading alliance, which is not a trading bloc. Right? We're going to go back. It's just, do we do it painfully and slowly over 20 or 25 years, or do we do it over 5 years? Are we more honest? Do we go back as a vassal state with no power, or do we go back as a member? But I think we're going to go back, and I think they want us to go back. They don't underestimate who wanted Brexit. So on the night of Brexit, the BBC panned in Sunderland to a woman with 2 men who had no hair, about my age, and they set the story of Brexit, which was it was the left behind areas and the working class. The problem was that the majority of people who voted to leave were social class A and B, and more people in the south of England voted to leave than in the north of England. And a paper came out this week showing that the wealthy are much likely to vote to leave, and of course all the funding was from very wealthy people. Right? It's a conservative thing to leave. And Nigel Farage could really, really use any hint very effectively. But I think we're going back. The question is how. I err slightly towards the naive politics and truthful. Which is why I like the Left Party, because at least they say what they believe in, which is democratic. It's just on the edge. I would rather be honest and just say we need to be back in. If you want an alternative to being back in, other than simply doing what America says, Trump's spokesman by the Balance Today programme explained what we've got to do. And when Justin Webb asked him what's in it for us, this was 2 days ago, he went, "Oh, you can keep the special relationship." It's like Love Actually, if you've seen that, with the president in there. So that's we're currently, poor old Prince Charles, King Charles, is going to have to hold hands with Donald and walk down. Yeah, that's what you have to do if you're king. We are basically going to not be rude about it. If we were in the EU, we wouldn't have to do that. We're going to have to creep to the Americans. The third player, apart from America and Europe, is China, which may be where Corbyn's advisors might have been, I'd say, most utopian. There is a theory that whichever country cleverly makes a deal with China and becomes the place where the exports come in through, like Ireland and America, the economy's booming in Ireland because of America. But I'm not so utopian to think that we could necessarily, we've shot it anyway because we're so rude to the Chinese that's gone. So I'm afraid China's not an option. Being controlled by Trump is not particularly safe, doesn't do anything for us, so it's back in. What's protecting sterling? If you want to know when it's going to happen, before you were politically engaged, there was a man called George Soros, and he became very, very rich by betting against sterling. There's nothing backing up our currency. There is 2 trillion of sterling in the European Central Bank. It's been there since we were in the EU. It's theirs. The European Central Bank, unless they're incredibly lovely people, are not going to waste hundreds of millions of that money, which is theirs, just held in our currency, defending our currency. And if you want a fear, that's one of the potential fears for what could go wrong in the near future. Wouldn't be a problem if we had the euro, right? You can't play games of the euro; it's too big. Yeah, but sterling, it's British. Any other question? Go on.
You mentioned higher education, and obviously higher education has been in a funding crisis now for a couple of years, at least, and the funding model's obviously problematic. And you said we need to get better at what we do in order to be able to keep getting people coming from overseas. But in my experience and from what I've seen, obviously the other countries such as China are actually learning from us, and they want to keep their graduates and develop their own ability to be able to teach. And also it's probably part of Chinese policy as well to boost their own nation rather than sending people abroad. What would you see as the key policy driver going forwards in order for the higher education sector to get out of its current hole?
Yeah, and you have to remember, which election is it? Well, I might even have been 2019, all the political parties other than the Conservatives were committed to abolishing tuition fees. In case you're not aware, the rest of mainland Europe, you wouldn't be paying any tuition fees or hardly anything, £300 a year. Of course, the quality of their education is terrible there. Our university is the best in the world. I won't dig myself. We don't allow you lot to be tested at age 24 to compare. We do have general tests of the population at age 24, and the general population of the UK is worse at maths and problem solving and literacy than 24-year-olds in the rest of Europe. But that must be all the people who didn't go to university, except that 65% now go by age 30. 2/3 are going to university by age 30, the highest in Europe because we marketised it. But then we're all going to get higher salaries than average, even though it's 2/3 of you. And the third who aren't going have got the white van and they're doing the job that needs to be done. Anyway, it's madness. The whole thing is madness. I wrote 2 policy papers which were published by the Progressive Economics Forum, which was the advisory group to John MacDonald, the Shadow Chancellor. You can see why I'm out now. Which are called Jubilee something a plan how to get rid of tuition fees and become a normal European country, or Scotland. Sorry, there's lots of things. Yeah, a lot of this. If you think Scotland has the lowest rate of child poverty in the UK, by the way. You know, but it's because they got different rock. It's the culture. They're culturally homogeneous. You couldn't possibly do it here. I love Scotland because they don't expel kids from school either. And it would have happened if Labour controlled Scotland. It was devolution. It was the best thing that Blair did. Devolution, incredibly successful policy. Just let people run their own place. I think we need to taper the tuition fees downwards. Have a plan for how we do it. Exeter, you are probably a university in which 35% of you, and this is the thing you won't tell your friends, maybe. You'll tell your friends all kinds of things about yourselves, but you probably don't tell your friends if mum and dad are paying your fees. 35% of you, mum and dad are paying your fees, 65% have got a loan. Those who got a loan, it's not 30 grand, it's 100 or 150 we pay back. Those who mum and dad are paying the fees, nothing. Think carefully about whether you're going to get together with somebody who's doing over what house you could get later. Although it's good you don't tell each other because you're socially embarrassed, but it's just not fair. It's really, really not fair. Nationally, it's 10% of students don't pay fees because mum and dad pay. 90% have these incredible loans with really high interest rates now. Nurses will pay back more than the banker. Absolutely, not relatively, absolute money. So we just need to do something about it. We brought them in because it's a short-term fix. The alternative would have to be like a European country. We didn't want that. So instead, we lend you the money because you couldn't pay the fees. None of you, not even those who are well off, mum and dad pay it, you haven't got it. So it needs sorting. And what I would do pragmatically is I would work to increase the overseas fees higher and higher and higher, but in return you actually are delivering something of use. And that would be part of the rationale. And you'd say it. We had a course in my department where we increased the fee dramatically. Anybody want to guess what a master's degree cost in my department 1 year?
40,000?
Yeah, 40,000. But we increased it above that, and the number of applications doubled. Because it must be good if it's the most expensive master's. Don't complain. Right? This is something to do, and it's better than casino banking or weapons, which we're getting worse at. Arms trade, not very good. So that's what I do.
You could do that at Oxford. I think that would be harder at Exeter.
For overseas fees, not necessarily, because it isn't much money. See, one thing, remember, we've become a poor country. The average European is 3% richer than us and going. Mum and dad own a corner shop in Shanghai. This is cheap. A small 2-bed flat, not in the poshest area of a large Chinese city, it's going to cost you 2 million. It's a different world out there. We've, 2 world wars and 1 World Cup. We're still great. But the advantage is we're cheap. And it's something to be, and you can actually be proud of it, not cynical. There will be a cohort of people floating around the planet who want to get away from home, who want to go abroad, and the country that actually does speak English, right? And it's already happening. So in Sheffield, me and my friend Carl, we had 60,000 overseas students in Sheffield, Hallam and the old university, which is why nobody had to demolish tower blocks or terraces in Sheffield anymore. They stopped doing that. We worked out the export earnings from them. The average graduation earns you £5,000 as a country, the hotel fees and mum and dad flying in. The export earnings per year to South Yorkshire were £250 million. And the metal trade is less than that. You might think, full Monty, no metal trade. Metal trade's a really nice euphemism for arms trade. And it's titanium shells which are made. But we make less money out of selling arms from South Yorkshire, and Rolls-Royce are there, than universities. So, and it's an economic plan, but you want to be good at it. It's happened by accident. We didn't intend this to grow. It's happened, and I would grow it. But the quid pro quo for the home students is you are aiming to be like Scotland, and this happens in the USA. If you are in-state student, you're paying $3,000 or less a year. If you want to cross the state because you want a big experience, fine, but you've got to pay more. Your fees are higher than the average fee in the United States. You're paying the highest university fees in the history of human beings ever known. But one trick about this, or how universities get away with it, is to put them up. Right? So if they're put up to say 12 grand in a couple of years, then you'll go, oh, well, at least I only had to pay 9,250. It was a bargain, right? But it's and the ultimate one. So the ultimate losers aren't you, by the way, just to cheer you up. The ultimate loser's me, because in 10, 15 years' time, I'm going to be trying to sell a house in Oxford. I'm just about to pay my mortgage off. You can look at me and hate me. But I'm going to be trying to sell a house because I want to move out and retire. And we've just done this to the future middle class, and we've been doing it since 2012. So we're not going to be able to sell our houses at the prices we think we're going to get for them. They're not worth what they, because you and the people who are 10, 12 and 13 years older than you don't have enough money to buy my house because we made you pay the fees and the interest rate on the loans. So ultimately you win. You win because you're young. There are less of you because we had fewer babies. You'd win faster if you just only would take over control. And that's partly what happened in 45. A generation came back from the war completely distrusting the older generation who'd taken us to 2 world wars, both of which could have been avoided, and took over. And they took over from the 40s and the 50s and the 60s. But you have to think you can do it. And you have to want to do it. Otherwise, you know, I get my bus pass in 3 years, by the way. You know, not you know, perhaps that's what I should do. I should just be really, really annoying and old to galvanise politics. It's ridiculous, the things you get. And it's not, we have old age poverty, but we have a lot of very, very well off older people who don't need more than 1 cruise holiday a year, right? And skiing's dangerous, but anyway. Yeah.
Something for both the geographers and the politicians in the room.
Yeah.
How is it you ended up in the School of Geography as opposed to politics?
How did I not do politics? I was always interested in politics, but I knew that politics departments, they have to be neutral. And I didn't think I could go through 3 years of sitting with politics lecturers trying really hard not to let their students know what their own opinions are. I don't know if that's still the case doing politics, but it's kind of an unwritten rule. If you do politics, if you're a politics academic, you try and do that. But the conference I have attended the most is something called EPOP, which is Election Parties and Opinion Polls. I'm a nerd, and it's the largest subgroup of the British Political Association. And it meets every year. And what's interesting about it is all the pollsters from all 3 parties come. And they've all got more in common because these are nerdy people who like numbers. So you've got John Curtis falling off his chair and that kind of thing. And the people who do political strategy all go to this conference and actually get on with each other because there's not that much difference between the parties.
Next question, please.
You mentioned about Scottish devolution being beneficial for Scotland generally. I was wondering, do you think it would be feasible for Wales to be able to do something similar, or do you think they're too locked into England for that to be workable the same way it is in Scotland?
I think it would be workable. It would require some guts, not just from the Welsh, but from Westminster government to do it, and they're trying and pushing. The problem is that there are all these routes into Wales from England, and there's the A470 goes up. You know, the main interior road is at some point just, and so Wales is geographically incredibly divided, and it's UKIP central that UKIP hold their conferences in North Wales. All the way to Barmouth is where I'm stereotyping, but essentially, if you're in Birmingham and you don't like being in a city with black people, you retire to that part of Wales. So it's kind of Bigot Central, and they've got their own Western Daily Mail, special version of the Daily Mail. So this is, and then you've got the valleys, which interestingly are immigrants. So the highest areas of immigration just over 100 years ago in the world, first was California for the gold rush, and the second was the Welsh valleys. Nobody's Welsh in the Welsh valleys, except sound Welsh. So it's a very divided country. But just looking at the record of Scotland, it's worth having tax raising powers. It's worth, there's no detriment. It becomes much, much harder in England. I would go for slowly moving towards a federal state, but we've had this block for centuries, whereas the rest of Europe hasn't. There is a plan. The plan was produced by Freddie Heineken, who made the beer. And he employed 2 historians to produce the Heineken map of Europe, which was what the future of Europe should be, where you change the boundaries of large countries to make them the same as smaller countries, so that you don't have these monoliths like Spain and Italy and Germany and France and us. And this wasn't taken very seriously until Yugoslavia broke up, and then it actually formed very similar units to what was in the Heineken map. And what's funny about the Heineken map, you can Google it, is that there's all kind of clever things in England. So it gives Yorkshire and the North East a 1, but it does something like makes Newcastle the capital but calls it Yorkshire. Or so there's some sort of nuance into how to do it. But we have a school and a university system which was designed for running an empire. We have a country designed. So you divide people up in schools. You have a hierarchy of universities. Most of the world, you go to the nearest university. It's far better. But not if you're running an empire. You have schools where you teach them to use rifles, hence the song in Eton. Stiff upper lip, learn how to treat other people, which is absolutely brilliant for creating the biggest empire the world's ever seen. But when you lose your empire, it implodes in on itself, and that's what we have. And we need a way out of it.
Next question, please.
I mean, sort of looking at Jeremy Corbyn, because he still does talks and things, and he still has a lot of followers and a lot of people who support what he's doing. Do you think just because he's left the Labour Party that this is kind of his end in politics? Do you think he has a future?
His cat died this week. It's on social media. El Gato. Sorry, some offence in
R.I.P. El Gato.
El Gato. Remember, I wanted El Gato to have a little tomb next to Mark's in Highgrave Cemetery, but anyway, or George Michael is the more famous person in that cemetery. No, he hopefully will retire. His wife married him. Well, I think he actually rescued her as a hostage. That's not told about. It's in a really posh American magazine. He rescued his wife who was held hostage. Right? It's incredible what you're not told when somebody's got to be talked down. But she married him to retire. And didn't get work. He's a lovely old man, but he shouldn't. The interesting thing is, if an inarticulate person who talks for far too long, I'm not being mean to him because you can see I do that too, who has no particular benefit or charisma that comes from something else can do this well, what could Faiza Shaheen have done? Which is why she had to be removed 3 days before the election as a candidate. Or what could Angela do, the Deputy Prime Minister, if she was actually standing up there, being a bit feisty? Or what, and I can go for another 30, mainly women, or what can the one you don't yet know do, if he could? So what Jeremy has shown, accidentally, is that a stumbling person, if they just say things that people like, and have somebody, Andrew Fisher, writing a manifesto that says things that people actually support, what can happen? I think that's the main thing to remember or learn from this. And it's happened at other times around the world. It's happened in Chile. And the problem only comes when the people vote. And when the people vote for them, that's when you have to get rid of them. Because that's when they're dangerous. Until then, it's okay. Yeah. Because from the point of view, let me tell you, man, imagine I'm a patriot. Well, imagine I went to Eton, where only one boy stood up to make the case for Labour at that 2015 period, and he went for Liz as the leader, and I wrote a book with him. You go to Eton, your sensible politics is Conservatives, but we're a democracy, so every 3 or 4 elections Labour should win. The world is complicated out there and dangerous, and we need a big armed forces, and our nuclear deterrent is really, really important, and we're lucky to have it. The little people just don't understand that Russia wants to come for us, if not the French. They're the historic enemy. We have the largest security service in Europe, and my job as a patriot is to defend this country. And I discuss the enemy within, because in fact, to be honest, the enemy within is much more dangerous than somebody blowing up a bus bomb. They might even corrupt the minds of young people, and that would alter us forever. And you have to deal with that in some way. And it's not a conspiracy, it's just decent men, decent blokes. Oh, the grown-ups in the room. The grown-ups in the room have to get together and do the right thing. And yeah, if I keep my mouth shut and nobody knows who I am, I listen to this.
Remind me who in the room of geographers, mainly over here.
Yeah.
So what advice do you have what they can do after they graduate with their geography degree?
Well, you'll do better than the politics or Labour. You may not know, but you have potentially the 10th highest salaries of everybody who does a degree from all degrees. So the high ones are the medics and the economists and people who do finance. But the Geographical Society likes to do these tweets going, "Do geography, you'll get a high salary." The bad news is the reason that geographers on average get the highest salary is that a few geographers get very high salaries and they go into banking. And they don't go into banking because we teach anything about banking. They go into banking because they come from families where there's an automatic route. No, just be happy that you haven't had your future determined for you already. That's the main thing. You can do anything. I would take a year out if you haven't already. That's the main thing I would do. And if you're female, you're probably going to live to 100. So there's no need to do anything that fast. That's the end of my advice. It is a nice degree, because you're taught almost anything, and it's random in each geography department. It's not like politics, so we have no discipline, we have no curriculum. What degree you do depends on who's teaching at the time you turn up in the place you're in, which does make it a slightly odd, but it's kind of like a free degree, and roughly half our lecturers where I work, their background isn't geography. They're refugees from biology or refugees from sociology. So they tend to be mavericks. Or they did politics and they want to teach political geography, and they don't have to abide by the rules of a politics department. Or they want to do economics, but they can't stand what economists do. So it's an interesting degree to do. Oh, climate change, job for life. It's not going to get cooler. Yeah.
Next question, please.
Sorry. Previously, you've mentioned that we'd be sort of not safer if we were signed with the European Union. Since we've seen sort of like greater divide between America and the EU.
Yes.
And so sort of my sort of assumption is, given the fact that the Americans are sort of in charge of NATO, there's no real European armed force anymore. Why would you have that be the case? And also, we previously said about the fact that there were £2 trillion in the European Central Bank. If, let's say, there was some sort of bailout, it's not just Britain that's
couples right now is a lot of European countries as well. So why would European Central Bank be more keen on covering Britain? And thirdly, when we said about the education system in the UK, what I've noticed in the Far East, especially in China, where they try to make the government sort of make completely socialist education system, where it's just one examination, one final entrance exam and everything. But really, there's no real equality, because there's always that the cities perform a lot better, and there's usually a lot better teachers. And even if you make teachers the same, parents still want their kids to do the best, so they pay for extra tuition time outside the school, or they send people to the UK, and things like that. So, so what sort of, how could you sort of prevent that? Given the fact that Labour wants to sort of
or what do we choose? You win good education systems, and then you lose them. So I mean, we had an incredible change in our education system just at the right time for me. We got rid of the 11 plus in almost all counties, not this one. I wouldn't have passed 11 plus to do that. And the idea that almost everybody, or 90%, could go to the same schools was fairly revolutionary in the 60s. And people came from Finland to see what we did, and then they implemented it there, but slightly better. Now we're more divided again. So these things go up and down. I'm trying to be very, very quick. I think America economically is in a really, really dangerous situation, because at the moment it can print its currency. It's the one, what's that weird theory called? Modern monetary theory, just to annoy anybody. I don't believe it, unless you're America. If you're America, you can print dollars until China says no. And then the question is, exactly what are you making? And you can't use Facebook in China. Not allowed to. You can't use Google. It's banned. There's nothing that America does that China needs. So this is a dangerous situation that we're currently in. China's the one we don't talk about much, other than saying they're really terrible. And China's changed a lot. China's now as unequal as the USA in terms of income. It wasn't, but it was incredibly poor. There was a weird point in between. I don't know China well. I've only been twice in my life, but I was there 2 weeks ago. And I was there with one of my former students and another. They're both 33. And so they benefited, I would say, but of course they're the winners, from that point when all the primary schools were almost identical. Now, what you get is slightly weird. What you get is super nerds who rise to the top. And you also get women rising to the top because of the one-child policy. Because you just have one child. You're not going to, oh, it's a girl. Let's forget that. She's your only child. So there was this period in the past of quite high meritocracy, but it does produce just weirds and people kind of high up on the spectrum in charge. Now it's back to more corruption again, but it's not necessarily good. But we just don't look at China. We don't look at what is almost certainly the world's most strongest power already economically. We just go, it's bad. They don't look at us because the BBC's banned there, just like Russia Today. Can't see it. If you want to know why the BBC's banned, just look at today's BBC news story about I was locked up because I protested and they said I was schizophrenic. Could have been true, or the young lad actually could have been schizophrenic. But what we do is just constant baiting China to the point they just cut it off. And it's where we're most ignorant. We just don't want to believe it. The centre of world power started in modern world power in Amsterdam. It was the richest place in the world. It's the beginning of capitalism. René Descartes said that all around me is madness in the 1650s. Men have lost their minds for money. And that was free trade and Protestant religion. They jumped over in 1668 to here, and we became the centre of the world. And you can lend and make as much money as you want. The church isn't in charge anymore. And then it jumped to Manhattan, which is Dutch. Right? So we've had the same system for centuries. Protestant, white, Western, same idea, getting bigger. This is different. And there's just a complete lack of accepting that's where it's going. And that's why geography is fascinating. So my colleague in Shanghai is trying to develop an international geography curriculum where you could actually teach the same geography around the planet as if we were one planet. which may sound impossible. We have a geography curriculum in this country now which concentrates on things like South America because we can't talk about Africa anymore. At least we're not doing. When I was at school, I had to memorise all the things we could get out of each country in Africa. And if I did it really well, I could get an A level. We're currently in a period where we don't talk about our history, but we actually, literally, history curriculum. Second World War, some Tudors, right, but miss out all the embarrassing bits. Every child in China knows about the Opium Wars, where our Prime Minister stood up and said, we are going to defend the right of free trade to sell our opium in China, and destroyed it. And we don't teach that as part of our history, which is quite a big gap in your knowledge, like general knowledge of the world. We don't teach all the famines in India. Yet your children will probably learn all these things, and it'll be done in a sensitive way. It's not their fault, right? And it probably wasn't their grandparents either. It's just a few very driven men who were told that this was their duty. And if it hadn't been Britain, it would have been another European power. Sorry for waffling, but you asked 3 questions. It's too much.
Next question, please.
Hi, so I very recently finished reading a book called Libertarianism and the Case Against Extreme Wealth by Danny Dorling. And yesterday I was reading an article which is a single photo of Donald Trump's inauguration. The net worth of every single individual in that photo accumulated to 1.1 trillion.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the ethics of such extreme wealth, and as a society, is it possible to limit the amount of wealth an individual can accumulate, and if so, how could we possibly go about doing that?
How can we do it? That's a lovely question. Ingrid Robbins, brilliant Dutch social scientist, far too shy. She should just shout. She's done more work on wealth and what you do about it than anybody else. And it's really interesting to me that this has started in the Netherlands, where wealth accumulation on this scale began as well. And the basic finding is almost everybody agrees that more than 10 million is too much, or you can begin to tax over 10. Most people think that you can begin to tax some wealth over 2, but obviously a bit less, because some people might be. I haven't publicly proposed the Jeremy Clarkson tax yet, because I'm tempted. This is an income tax, not wealth. Very quickly, and it goes this way. I would go up to like a 98% tax once you've got an income of over $1 million, and the reason is Jeremy Clarkson, because he's getting old. And if I shouldn't, he probably wouldn't sue me. Right, supposing Jeremy gets an offer to fly to Australia and do another 4-week shooting of Top Gear. He should be free to only do it if he really wants to. And the only way to know you really want to is if you're not going to get any money for it. So if they're going to pay him $1 million to do it, given his income's already high enough, that should all go to the Treasury. I've got to formulate the Jeremy Clarkson tax better. But you can look at data from the spirit level and what happens to rich people. I wouldn't want 20 million. I know people with that much money. I know what happens in the families. I know you have to lie to your parents because your future depends on them. You have to sign prenups. I love you. I love you. You love me. We love each other very much. We're going to get together and we're going to form a family. But could you just sign this bit of paper in case? That's the life of very rich people. Sorry, I'm not going to date you. It can be done. There's been lots of proposals of how you do it. We already do it in a way. We have inheritance tax. Only 7% of people pay it. Nobody in Hull does, ever. You slowly increase them. The problem with wealth taxes is that people get very good at avoiding them. So they were reduced in Norway recently. It's better if they're annual and continuous rather than one-off. So inheritance tax is actually inefficient because people work out a way round. It was really efficient when we banged it in after World War I, but eventually they work a way around. The best taxes are taxes where, if you don't declare it, you don't own it. So everybody pays stamp duty when they buy a house, because if you don't, it's not your house. And I would do that with wealth taxes. I'd say, here are the wealth taxes. This is what you got to pay. If you don't pay it, that wealth isn't yours. And that incentive might well help with the avoidance of it. The Troika insisted that Ireland bring it in after 2008, so they brought a sudden wealth tax in. The world didn't end. In fact, they got richer. But it's not in the interest of wealthy people to be wealthy. You get dysfunctional, very sad families that are very wealthy. So it's even in their interest. But you have to, and loads of people have suggested banning billionaires to do it. But we're in a bizarre situation worldwide with these, and we're obsessed by them. So it's Davos time again. Oxfam have probably pressed a button. Oxfam produces one huge report a year, which is how many billionaires on the birth zone, more than half the planet. And it's obscene, but if you forget the billionaires and you forget about 100 million people, the rest of the world has been becoming more equal over time. Not necessarily within countries, but certainly between them. Inequality has fallen, equality has increased in almost every country in Europe in the last 10 years, ever so slightly. It's increased here since 2019 because every pay deal's been progressive, because it had to be, because if you didn't increase wages at the bottom, people would starve. And that's very recent. It's very positive that's occurred. And we've had a reduction in wealth inequality because house prices haven't gone up as much as inflation. So the fastest way to get increased wealth equality is inflation. So if goods and food goes up and wages go up with it, as they did in the 70s, but house prices don't, then houses suddenly become affordable. And these things really do alter. But I would like it to be smooth, slow, not frightening, and for people to realise that taxes actually make your life better, increase your levels of happiness, reduce the number of antidepressants that are taken in places where they have higher taxes. It's a kind of win-win, and have the most obvious beneficial effect on the richest. So the top 1% in Sweden do much, much better than the top 1% in the USA. Okay? I think some point this standard date will fail. I think all the members of ABBA are still alive. Is it the case? Does anybody know who ABBA is? Okay. ABBA chose to relocate or to locate to pay high taxes in Sweden rather than go to a tax haven. And almost every American pop star of their vintage is dead. Of which Michael Jackson's the one you probably know about. But it's a trite thing, but you can look across the numbers for the top 1% in different countries, and they live longer and they're much happier in the most equal countries where they're paying the highest taxes. And once that's a fact, if that wasn't a fact, it would be harder, because they'd have a really good reason to want to gang up and be mean to people. Donald Trump's family are not a happy bunch of people, right? Little Donald Jr. isn't sitting there going, "This is great," and what's her name? The daughter doesn't like him very much either. It's not good compared to a standard, more equitable European country with many political parties, where your family can be in politics, your mother or father can be prime minister, and you can lead a normal life. In the case of Finland, mum and mum brought you up in poverty, and you become the leader of the state for the Social Democratic Party. Incredible things happen. Not in our country. In our country, you must go to Oxford, and you almost always must be posh. You can pretend you're not. You can go to a selective school in Surrey that's a private school, but claim, because the state paid my fee, I'm a man of the people. You can say, this is my little dig at Starmer, by the way, you can say I could only go to the University of Leeds because the government paid, and not mention the fact that mum and dad paid for you to go to Oxford for your master's degree to Teddy Hall. You can say that my father's a tool maker, and not mention that that's what he wrote on the company's house document you can all access. You all you've got is Google Rodney Starmer. There's only one Rodney Starmer. Put in Rodney Starmer, company's house, and on his company's director's form, it says occupation toolmaker. But he's also a company director, right? And in British politics, you need money to be an MP. Whereas in politics in more equal countries, people who don't have money can become members of parliament. Yeah.
For the very final question, Danny, what is your favourite political TV show or movie?
You're going to ask this of everybody, aren't you? Yeah. Okay.
The
Excellent.
most common answer is West Wing.
No. I'm older. I wrote it down. I wrote down the quote because I made it too small to me see. I bet you don't know. I think it's a Disney movie, like a Pixar one. It's called Ants. Antz. Anybody? You've seen Ants? Okay, Ants is brilliant. I'll tell you very briefly. The development began in 1988. Walt Disney feature animation. It's going to be called Army Ants, and it's about a pacifist worker ant teaching lessons of independent thinking to the militaristic colony. It took 10 years to produce Ants. It stars Z, who's the worker, who ends up getting together with the princess at the end. The revolution happens. It's worth watching. Antz. Just Google it. You can find it on an illegal website. And I'll read you out the quote at the end of it. This is Z, the worker ant. And Z goes, "There you have it. Your average boy meets girl, boy likes girl, boy changes underlying social order story." So what else can I tell you? We rebuilt the colony. It's even better before. And now it's got a very large indoor swimming pool because they flooded it. And at that point, the camera pulls out, and this is early Pixar animation, and the ant colony is in the middle of Central Park in America. And the message is it could happen here. So Ants, Antz is my favourite. It shows my age. Yeah. Thank you very much.
And Mano, can I get a huge round of applause for Danny, please?